Israel just struck a northern Syrian air base, and the Turkish delegation that was there had just left hours ago. If they had hit the delegation, Israel would have triggered a war with NATO, which is insane. And so I thought the Israeli aggression along these lines was just bluffing and posturing for their elections. It turns out that is not the case. Both sides are preparing for a war. We're going to explain that to you throughout the story. I'm going to come back and make some points about how Israel's preparing and Turkey's preparing. I've also figured out why Israel wants this war. It turns out there's an economic reason. So this is a startling development. A country that has started so many wars in the Middle East, Israel, attacking nearly all of its neighbors, now attacks Syria again and would like to start a war against NATO, which would include America. Anna, please explain to us the details of this story, which are unbelievable.
Gladly, but I will say it is not unbelievable. I think we need to get to a place where people are no longer experiencing even a drop of naivete when it comes to the genuine intentions and motivations of Israel. But with that in mind, let me tell you what we know so far. So Israel dropped at least 8 bombs on runways and hangars at the Abu Duhur air base in northern Syria specifically. So that's about 45 miles away from the Turkish border. Now, luckily, these Israeli strikes that hit this air base didn't end up killing anyone, but they did do a lot of damage to like the runways, which had just been rebuilt following a pretty devastating Syrian civil war. Now, at first, Israel completely denied that they had carried out this attack. An Israeli military censor, in fact, put a gag order on any reporting in Israel that would confirm that the Israeli Defense Forces had conducted these strikes. And then US Ambassador to Turkey and Syria, Tom Barrack, then goes on X and confirms what we all suspected, that Israel was in fact behind these strikes, these 8 bombs at this airbase in which a Turkish delegation was just at and had just left hours earlier. So let's get to some of the reporting on this. As Tom Barrack wrote on X, he says that we are deeply concerned that the confirmed Israeli airstrikes on the airbase constitute an unnecessary escalation that does not advance regional stability. Now, let me just pause for a second and remind everyone that this is the guy who spoke down to Lebanon, to the Lebanese people on behalf of Israel. He's a major Zionist, hardcore Zionist, always sides with Israel. But in this case, he's speaking out and he's the one who really confirmed that these strikes happened in the first place. He says the al-Shara government, al-Shara is the relatively new leader and former al-Qaeda terrorist of Syria, has neither adopted a predatory posture nor maintained proxy forces. It has in fact repeatedly indicated its preference for de-escalation with Israel. The United States has in the past and will continue in the future to host discussions to encourage diplomatic cadence over kinetic frustration for both nations. Okay, so there he is confirming it. Now the real question is, why? Why is Israel doing this? Now, Israel later did confess that Turkey was their target. I'm not kidding. They say, Netanyahu in particular says, well, we needed to do like a preemptive strike because we're concerned about Turkey carrying out a military buildup in Syria. A preemptive strike. So nothing had even happened yet, and they admit that. So Israel had attacked the base because Syria was on the verge of breaching an agreed upon status quo in security matters by allowing Turkish troops to deploy there. That is what Netanyahu said in a public statement. Now, Israel is worried that there is a Turkish military buildup happening in Syria, but the Syrian foreign minister says, no, there is no Turkish military buildup. This was in an interview with Axios. He said the following: there was no intention to establish a Turkish base there, nor to establish a permanent Turkish military presence or deploy Turkish forces at the site. There was no Turkish military buildup at the base in any sense that would justify such an interpretation. The base was, in fact, largely empty. And again, going back to Netanyahu's statement, he himself admits that. It's just that he had the suspicion that they were about to engage in a military buildup, and he needed to do something to prevent that. And by the way, I'm gonna go to reporting out of Israel that shows that this is genuinely a strategy the Israelis intend to deploy. So what was the Turkish delegation actually doing there? We should address that. So 2 Syrian officials who spoke to the Associated Press on condition of anonymity said that the Turkish delegation had visited the air base in the northeastern province of Idlib to basically review rehabilitation work underway at the facility. As I mentioned earlier, they're trying to rebuild Syria after a devastating years-long civil war. Turkey accused Netanyahu of making untenable allegations intended to legitimize Israel's unlawful airstrikes targeting Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Sovereignty and territorial integrity are 2 things that Israel couldn't care less about. Let me just be clear about that, but let me continue with the rest of this. It alleged that Netanyahu aimed to pursue expansionist and destabilizing policies in the region ahead of the elections in Israel. That is 100% true. There's no question about that. Israel's behavior, certainly when they're trying to annex land from Lebanon, when they're trying to take over all Palestinian territory. I mean, they are putting the clean break memo into action. It's been in action for a long time because they do want to expand their borders and carry out what is known as the Greater Israel Project.
Okay, this story is wild. Trump reportedly left Turkey on a secret military flight after officials received intelligence about a possible Iranian threat. He was moved in a catering truck to another plane while Air Force One continued on as a decoy. Now look at how differently that gets framed. On the left, the focus is, wait a minute, you left a plane full of staff and journalists behind to act as a decoy? On the right, the story's mostly about protecting the president, secret security tactics, and Trump joking that it was basically a James Bond operation. They did everything but put in dun 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 dun. Now look, of course you protect the president, but if there was a credible threat against the plane, what about everybody else on it? I've covered politics long enough to know that sometimes the most important part of a story is the part somebody wants you to overlook. I want to be able to see that for myself. That's why I use ground news. It puts reporting from across the political spectrum in one place, so you can instantly compare the framing, see the bias distribution, check the factuality ratings, and see who owns the outlets behind the coverage. Their blind spot feed also shows you stories one side is barely covering at all, because sometimes what gets ignored is just as revealing as what gets emphasized. Go to ground.news/TYT or scan the QR code to get 40% off the Vantage plan, the same plan we use. I absolutely recommend checking it out, ground.news/TYT.
So this airbase that was struck, the Abu Duhur air base, lies at a strategic location near the borders between Idlib, Aleppo, and Hama provinces. There's something else that's incredibly important about this location of where the strikes happened. So Turkey's communications directorate also said that Turkey will resolutely continue to cooperate with the Syrian government on a legitimate basis for the establishment of peace, stability, and prosperity in Syria, and will never allow the destabilization of Syria. And look, there is a lot of cooperation between Turkey and Syria. For instance, Turkey is assisting Syria in its efforts to rebuild its armed forces, Syria's armed forces. Israel no like that. Israel doesn't want any country in the region to be militarized, and they're very open about that, which is disgusting because who are you to tell a sovereign country whether or not they're allowed to have a military? But let me continue. They train Syrian personnel at Turkish military schools and bases. Turkey also provides Syria with equipment and logistical support. And just last year, Syrian troops took part in military exercises that were held in Turkey. So here in the United States, when Trump was informed about what happened, he didn't really seem to care. In fact, he had absolutely no criticism for what Israel had carried out. All he said was, I can't talk about it, okay? And Trump has been attacking NATO rather aggressively. Now, you can argue, and I think this is true, Trump attacks NATO for a variety of reasons. He felt that NATO wasn't pulling their own weight, NATO countries, I should say. He felt that NATO abandoned the United States by not helping us in this stupid moronic war against Iran. And I think these NATO allies did the right thing by staying out of it. He disagrees with me on that, of course. But the real question is Trump looking to pull out of NATO? Because remember, Turkey is one of our NATO allies. And now I want to toss to something else that's really important here. So Israel Hayom is a publication owned by Miriam Adelson. And they put out a tweet today that I think is relevant to the discussion. Let's take a look at graphic 7. Jerusalem has studied not only how NATO's Article 5 operates, but where it applies. The treaty protects Turkish territory. Turkish troops do not carry that territory with them onto Syrian or occupied Cypriot soil. The headline of this piece is titled, "Turkey's Strategic Depth is now part of Israel's military calculus." Now, of course, because of course it is. And so if you read the body of the article, here's what they write. Israel did not wait for Turkish troops, aircraft, radar, or air defense systems. It destroyed the infrastructure required to receive them before the threat became entrenched. The operational rule is denial before things are entrenched. Before Turkish troops arrive, the target is infrastructure. Once they arrive, striking it also risks Turkish casualties, retaliation, American intervention, let's pause for laughter, and confrontation with a NATO member. And then finally, there's the economic reason that Israel is doing this, which I'm gonna toss over to you, Cenk, since this is something you teased about.
Yeah, so guys, when I first started reading about how Israel was talking about attacking Turkey and did you know that northern Cyprus is occupied? I thought this was bluffing and rhetoric, like, oh, you're criticizing us for the occupation, but how about Cyprus? That's also occupied. Relatively normal propaganda, and they view Turkey as against their interests for whatever reason, right? Well, I was a bit naive. It turns out the people running Israel, as we all know in other contexts, are lunatics. They're detached from reality. No, they have made detailed plans to attack Turkey. And they've made, the plans are so detailed, as Anna just explained to you, they already have a plan for where they can kill Turkish troops and where they can't. So they have a legal defense ready. If we kill Turkish troops on land that isn't Turkish territory, they think legally it doesn't trigger Article 5, which means that the rest of NATO has to defend Turkey. So I now also realize, in hindsight, looking back for the last 10 and even longer years here in America, the people who've been driving the anti-NATO propaganda, once again, the Israeli lobby. Why? Well, we didn't know it at the time, but they needed to destroy NATO so that they could attack Turkey and not have America and the rest of Europe retaliate. And so that's obviously unthinkable for Israel. And I'm sure that Israel thinks it doesn't matter. We have special exemptions. So if we wanted, we could bomb Paris and America would join on our side and not on the French side. And so they have grown so enormously arrogant that they have detailed meticulous plans on where to murder Turkish troops and get away with it. And here's what's not going to happen. They attack Turkish troops and Turkey does not respond. So they can claim all day long, as they do, and the American press, being their dogs and servants, can pretend that it's true, but the rest of the planet doesn't operate that way. So what do they say? They say, well, if we get hit first, well, that's obviously self-defense, and that gives us a right to not only counterattack, but do a genocide and do random wars that are not even related. It gives us infinite rights of self-defense. We could take 70% of Gaza, southern Lebanon for no reason, but hey, it's now ours, etc. But if we attack first, Israel says, like in Syria, oh, that's okay, it's preemptive attack, so that's just self-defense. So whether we get attacked or we do the attacking, it's self-defense either way. And the American media comes out like a bunch of puppets, and you can kiss my ass with whatever trope your accusations you make, but you are, and you sit there and you go, of course it is, it's self-defense. When you murder others and invade others and you attack others like Russia, no, that's not self-defense. When Israel does it, that's self-defense. Well, you're a bunch of liars. who are obviously working for Israel to spread their propaganda. And by the way, if you don't know, 1967, Israel attacked all of its neighbors and destroyed their air forces on day one. And then they called it self-defense because it was a preemptive attack. And all of American media lied to you your whole life. And they framed it as, oh, Israel was defending itself in 1967. The vicious Arab neighbors attacked them. That is not true. That is a 100% verifiable lie, and you could look that up. But to this day, you will get anchors on television in America lying on behalf of Israel. Okay, so now that brings us to what the hell are they doing with Turkey? So why would they want to go and attack the second largest military in NATO, even if NATO doesn't respond? It's the second largest military next to the United States and NATO. That is a gigantic military. And they think, no, it's okay. America will back us no matter what war we start, etc. And so why do they want it? Number one, they're not worried about Turkish occupation in Syria. That's what I thought. No, they're worried that Turkey is going to rebuild the infrastructure and the military of Syria. So after Assad was toppled and the new leader comes in, Israel at that point then went and bombed a whole bunch of Syrian military installations. Why? Because they didn't want the new government of Syria to build up any defenses. And they say it. They say, and it's in that article in Mary Madelson's publication, they say, yes, anyone who has a military around us is considered a security threat for Israel. And they say we have the right to eliminate any security threat. So Syria is not allowed to have a military. So if Turkey or Qatar or anybody else is helping them rebuild their own military, Israel finds that an unacceptable security threat, and they have a right to invade, attack, bomb Syria, and kill anyone they like, Syrians or Turks. So this is the ravings of a lunatic mind. So Anna, let me get to the economic point and then I'll come back in, and then I want to tell you about Turkey's preparations, because they're not like us. They understand war is coming and they are prepared. So I thought, okay, it's a rhetorical trick with Cyprus. It turns out, no, they need it for economic reasons. And again, Israel Hayom, Miriam Adelson's publication explains, the waters around Crete and Cyprus are Israel's strategic corridor to Europe. Energy, cables, shipping, and military access through Greece and the Republic of Cyprus. So they are planning a route where their gas fields, Leviathan, and the ones they think that they are acquiring by taking southern Lebanon, which is the Lebanese gas fields off their coast. They're going to take that and the Saudi and other Gulf countries' oil and gas, pass it through pipelines, and then get it to Europe. So that way you don't need the Strait of Hormuz. So the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is blocked is terrible for the United States and for the rest of the world, but it's excellent news for Israel, and Israel's been bragging about it. You're gonna need to use our pipelines, you have to use our route. The problem is that route has to get completed, and Cyprus is part of the route. So they need to attack Turkey and get into a war with them so they could take Cyprus for self-defense and set up their economic route to Europe. So these lunatics think that they are regional hegemons and they could attack any neighbor for just simple economic reasons, just to get richer. And by the way, the war in Iran is not just to destroy Iran. They want to destroy Iran and Turkey, have no regional competitors. But on top of that is also so that the Strait of Hormuz gets blocked. That's not the bug for them. That's the feature so that they could do this alternate route. Anna.
I was just gonna go back to the fact that Israel doesn't want any country in the region to have a military. One of the talking points that you'll hear from Zionists, both Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists here in the United States in the middle of any debate is that, but the Israelis, they made so many offers to the Palestinians. They made so many offers so they can have a two-state solution. But the reality is that they never, and this is intentional, mention the very obvious caveats. One of those major caveats to allowing Palestinians to have their own land, their own country, their own state is you're not allowed to have a military. Okay, so for every American watching this right now, whether you support Israel or you don't, just ask yourself this question. If we were to wake up tomorrow and we have no military at all, do we really have a sovereign country? aren't we then vulnerable to invasion by anyone who's interested in our natural resources? So when you hear that talking point, understand that it wasn't as cut and dry as they're trying to make it out to be. There was never really a good faith effort to allow Palestinians a chance at self-determination. There was always an effort to crush them by having unbearable, untenable terms, like you're not allowed to militarize. And even in cases in which, there is a concession from the other side. Well, what do the Israelis do? They always change the terms. I mean, we've seen this happen again and again when it comes to negotiating with Hamas. We've seen this happen again and again when it comes to negotiating with Iran. Iran will make all sorts of concessions that you would never believe Iran would make. Then they call Israel's bluff because Israel's still not happy and they want to change the terms of the negotiation. This is what Israel does. And to me, Cenk, look, maybe I'm too jaded. Maybe I'm too black-pilled. I don't know, but one thing I know without a shadow of a doubt is that I'm proven right again and again when it comes to Israel. Whether it's you or Mario Nawfal or all the other people who still feel this weird urge to give Israelis the benefit of the doubt, please stop. Please stop. It's gonna kill us. Okay, because that country will stop at nothing for power, for money, for natural resources. You think it's beyond them to kill Americans? They've been killing Americans. This is an evil country that will stop at nothing to increase its power on the international stage.
So the Americans might be a little bit naive, but apparently, and I didn't know this until today, the Turks are preparing. And I actually learned it from, again, Israel Hayom, the Israeli publication. And so they explained that the Turks have landed a lot more planes in northern Cyprus. And the paper actually pointed that out as a reason to attack Turkey quicker. They said, well, if they land more planes, then it'll seem more aggressive when we bomb them and try to take Cyprus. Yeah, I got news for you. That's gonna seem aggressive either way, okay? And so they're not just, like the Turks are preparing because they understand that Israel's means it and they're coming. And they just did a bombing and they barely missed the Turkish delegation. If they had, we'd be in an international incident now that again is pushing us closer and closer to World War III. So these people are lunatics. So they're saying before the Turks land more planes in northern Cyprus, which is their territory, and you can get into, hey, no, it's occupied, etc. That's an interesting, different conversation, but they control it right now is my point. They're thinking, well, maybe we should attack right away. You're gonna start a war with Turkey right away before they can amass more troops in their own territory that they control? These are again ravings of a lunatic mind, but it's actually happening. So then Turkey, according to Israel Hayom, has also made a deal with Somalia and potentially moving material into there to be able to put in ballistic missiles. So, and by the way, they say this as if Turkey has no right to make any alliances with any other country, have any missiles, any planes, any defense. And Syria was not, this says up and down, and Tom Barak, our ambassador to Turkey and Syria, confirms Turkey was not planning to bring Turkish troops to occupy northern Syria. They're rebuilding the Syrian military, and the Syrian military is saying they're working with us to rebuild our military. And Israel's like, yeah, I know. And we have an infinite right to destroy your military, even though you never attacked us, because we are the kings of this region and we can murder anyone we like at any time. And all we do here in America with our disgustingly corrupt politicians is enable them, enable their worst instincts. Well, of course, sir, here's more money, sir, for more genocides and more wars. Oh, you'd like us to do the war. Of course, sir, we'll do anything you want, sir. And then a bunch of jackals that we have to debate, pretending that Israel didn't take 70% of Gaza, that Israel isn't in southern Lebanon right now, and isn't in southern Syria right now. And we have to debate them that, hey, if they murder people first, is that self-defense? That's not a debate. It's not self-defense. Everything that Israel is doing right now is surrounded by a wall, just this giant circular wall of propaganda brought to you by American media. No, they're allowed to kill anyone they like. They can murder 23,000 children in Gaza, and they're the good guys. And if anyone complains, we're gonna destroy their lives. Well, then you're not an American and you're not a journalist. You're an Israeli marketing asset inside this country, and that's almost all of mainstream media. And you would know all of the evil intentions of Israel if you actually knew the real news, which we're delivering to you now. So Anna, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you say. And honestly, my latest frustration isn't even about Israel's behavior, because I've grown accustomed to Israel's behavior. I'm not surprised by anything they do. What does surprise me, though, is that we have multiple countries in the region led by so-called strongmen who have been sitting around and taking it. And the real question is that paradigm gonna shift? Because if ever there was a time for that paradigm to shift, it would be right now, when the United States doesn't even have the capability to intervene because of how we've depleted our weaponry, our interceptors. Something needs to be done with Israel. Israel is just it is a problem. Let's just put it that way. And I'm gonna stop before I get myself into more trouble. So let's take a break.
I'll say one last thing, Anna. Look, I don't know anything about the Turkish military or Turkish politics. I cover US and international news. But I do know Turkish nature. And if they think that they're just gonna kill a bunch of Turks, the government officials or the military or whatever, and go la li la li la, so what? We murder anyone we like, and you won't be able to fight back. You're weak, and we control America, and there's nothing you could do about it. I can tell you right now that as a matter of nature, the Turks will never, ever accept that, okay? Never. And no one cares what anyone else is gonna say. Oh, what did Jake Tapper say? Did he blame us? They're not gonna give a damn. And they will respond, and they will respond with a lot of force. And then Israel will cry and cry, oh, we're the victims. We were in the middle of murdering them, and they dared to fight back. Hey, Jake Tapper and everyone on American media, call them anti-Semites, say they're Jew haters, say that they have no right to defend themselves. Only Israel has a right to defend, to go on offense, to murder anyone they like. Say it, and they could say it all day long. But the Turks aren't gonna care. They're gonna strike back. And then God knows what happens after that, because there are lunatics in charge of the Israeli government. If they use nukes, we will enter World War III. And they are dragging down the entire planet with them. Somebody stop the lunatics.
They live up to every stereotype.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.